Hello, everybody. This is Jess from 3D Learning Experts, and you're listening to the LD Experts Podcast, the show for busy parents who want to help their kids with learning disabilities, or as I like to say, learning differences, go from surviving to thriving. Hello, everybody. Today we are talking to Gabrielle Matusevich. Did I get it right? Oh, cool.
Yes.
My last name is only 4 letters and people butcher it, so I know how important it is to say people's names right. Anyway, thank you for joining us today and sharing with our viewers about Montessori homeschooling. First, what is Montessori homeschooling?
Well, Montessori homeschooling is going to be, obviously a variation and a departure from the classroom setting because we don't have a full classroom and it's only geared for, just my kids. In my case, I have 2. And so I try to adapt and follow the lessons and the albums and the scope and sequence as much as possible. But more than just that, it's more how I approach their learning, what they want to learn, what their interests are. And I have tried to learn and to prepare myself to be that prepared adult and to train myself to be an observer of them, to refine things that I might need to do as far as how I show up as their guide and their mom. And then ultimately prepare their environment for their needs, to meet the societal expectations, and to provide for and nurture their interests. Rinse and repeat, right? So then I try to see what else needs to be refined. If let's say they've reached the end of a project they're working on or what have you, then I have a conversation with them. They're 8 and 10 years old. So it is totally open. It's a bi-directional thing. It's not, I'm not some dictator here. So it's a conversation and we talk about it and I tell them what our expectations are as their parents. And then I do kind of keep a close eye on the state standards. I don't allow ourselves to be governed and ruled by them, but I do keep our eye on them. And then I also try to take into account what they want to do and pursue, and then try to provide those things for them. So either by way of something that I teach or a virtual online class, maybe it's an asynchronous type of a virtual learning platform, or in learning centers or resources that we have in our community.
So you mentioned that it's different because it's just your 2 kids. I thought Montessori was pretty independent in itself. So why do you have to alter it since you only have 2 children?
Well, because I act as their peer in a lot of cases, right? So if they were in a class of 25 to 30 kids, at any moment, there might be somebody who is doing that same lesson in language or whatever. So let's say my daughter, who's 10, and she's a 4th year now going into 5th year, she may have a peer who may be able to buddy with her on that language assignment that she's doing or whatever it is. But I play that role of guide and peer. So it's the changing of those hats and those roles is not maybe that apparent to her or even to my son, but it's one of those things that changes because there's a lot of Montessori has a lot of, auto learning, and then also being able to correct on their own. So there's that control of error embedded, but sometimes I am the control of error, or in a classroom setting, their peer might be a control of error. So let's say they're working on a math problem, they're doing squaring or something, and they're working on it together and collaborating and moving the pieces of the manipulatives together, or they're taking turns. So that's where I would step in and work in parallel with my kids so that they can have that peer element, that partnership, because especially 6 to 12-year-olds, the second plane children, as they're known as, they really have a need for socialization and collaboration and learning within that context. So I play that role. Whereas if, let's say, I had a little pod, even of other kids, which I don't, been trying to form that, but not everybody does Montessori homeschooling, then it's me, basically.
So what made you decide to do Montessori homeschooling?
Well, I fell in love with the pedagogy. I love the philosophy and the approach. I love the whole idea of following the child, but not following them to the point of following them off a cliff. I love this idea of the guide not being a teacher so much as this, what they call spiritually prepared adults. So it requires a lot of work on myself to check my own biases, to check even when I'm sharing and giving a lesson, not like refraining from connecting the dots, because that's the role of the student, exploring with the materials and being basically little scientists in all the different subjects and exploring on their own, having those aha moments. So really, curating the environment with the things that I would like for them to work on, like, okay, well, this is what's next in math for you. This is what's next in language. And this is the next logical thing. And then from there, basically allowing them the freedom to choose, well, I want to start with my language today. So what it means is setting up the environment where, I tell them, this is what you're working on. These are the strands in math you're working on. These are the strands in language. And this is what you're doing for culture. Okay, then that's the limit that, maybe it's decimals and fractions, greatest common factor, and maybe it's learning how to write, do a keyword outline in language, whatever it is. But then the child gets to choose within that framework the order in which he or she is going to do the work. So having that component of freedom within limits is something that attracted me, because I think your original question was what attracted me to it. These are different aspects of approaching learning, approaching education that really attracted me. There's just this embedded nurturing and fostering independence in the child, not because I want to be lazy and hands off as a parent, but because in the long term, I'm raising adults. I'm not raising children, although I am, but I'm looking at the end goal in mind. And that is to have these self-actualized, independent, capable humans who can function on their own in the practical life realm. So taking care of themselves, taking care of their environment, taking care of their belongings, grace and courtesy, understanding at the different stages how to greet people, how to, communicate. We work on social emotional learning a lot, talking about that, because those are pillars of education and they're very much needed. So they're not, at least in our homeschool, we don't ignore them. We really focus on them. And then just allowing them to feel that satisfaction that can only come from doing it themselves, facing challenges, problem solving, figuring out how do I overcome this challenge. And then rather than saying, well, giving them the list, well, this is what I think you should do. You should just do it like this, and this. No, saying, okay, well, what do you think is the next logical step? And really approaching it from that project-based learning perspective, where they can really practice those executive functioning skills of, okay, planning, organizing, gathering materials, assessing, executing, making the mistakes that invariably take place and are part of the human condition, right? And then saying, okay, well, now let's have a conversation about it. What did we learn from it? And then also meeting deadlines, learning to meet deadlines that aren't necessarily hard and fast, right? Because if you're working in a job, fast forward, once they're really adults, they're working for a boss and boss says, hey, get this on my desk by next week. Well, that's going to be part of their lives, paying bills. There are due dates, right? And so practicing that now, but it's safe. It's safe too, because if they can't meet that deadline, then we say, okay, well, what were some of the challenges? How can I come alongside you and support you? And then having them think critically about it. So these are all the things that are, to me, inherent to the Montessori approach, not just giving the child the answers and spoon feeding and enabling them or robbing them of the opportunity to figure those things out on their own, and then scaffolding it, right? Because obviously a 6-year-old is not going to be as capable as, let's say, a 10-year-old, and a 10-year-old is not going to be as capable as a 15-year-old, and so forth. So understanding what they're capable of, really nurturing also part of what's part of Montessori is understanding the sensitive periods and the different planes of development, as Maria Montessori observed, during her time, and she observed it not just in a few children, in many children and in many parts of the world, and discovered universal attributes that children possess. And just learning that, I think it's so cool to know that it doesn't really matter. I mean, yes, everybody has their own personalities and the way they present themselves in the world, but at the same time, there are certain things that are very predictable. And if we know as guides what those things are, then we know how to show up for them, nurture them, and then of course make refinements based on that child's individual needs and interests.
Thank you for that amazing explanation. So
Sure.
where do you get the curriculum and the knowledge to know what to do when with your kids?
Yeah, so Montessori's homeschooling is not for the faint of heart. There's a big learning curve that comes with it, and it's not an in the box, like a boxed curriculum kind of thing, open and go. It's not at all like that. Although I do use a company. Am I allowed to say?
Oh, please. Yes.
Okay. All right. So Guidepost Montessori is a brick and mortar chain of Montessori schools, as I understand, in California, but I do believe they exist on the East Coast as well. They have a virtual homeschool program that I subscribe to, and they have all of the lessons in the Montessori album. So all the math, language, culture, practical life, all those things in asynchronous video format that the kids, especially in the 6 to 12, the elementary program, can watch and learn. So it's a Montessori guide who is giving the children the lessons. And so I come alongside my kids. So I'm not the lesson giver, but I'll come alongside them, especially as like my daughter, for example, she's going to be a 5th year, like I said, and she's working on concepts that I even struggled with when I was as a kid going through my own public schooling experience. And so super cool that I get to work on my own numeracy, for example, in math, and go through and relearn. It's been really a wonderful adventure. And then I get to be that peer. I get to come alongside her. So as she's doing her follow-up work and just, I just get to come alongside her and watch and see how her mind is expanding. And then I get to deepen my own. So we're both kind of learning at the same time. In math, for example, you can't just skip, 10, 15, 20 lessons ahead just for the heck of it. You need to follow because it's very linear and you need to learn certain foundational concepts before you advance. But for example, if I know that she's mastered, sometimes there are times in one sitting, she'll go through, the equivalent to 2 or 3 lessons. She just understands those concepts and we can move forward. Or sometimes we just need to move more slowly. But again, it's all moving at their pace. So there is maybe asynchronous learning. So it gives the appearance that, wow, they're so advanced in some ways, because if they're excelling and they're grasping it, then we can just move right along at their pace, not keep it, for example, like as a traditional brick and mortar school where everybody has to move the same, because you can't have a teacher managing 20, 30, 40 kids, depending certain school districts. You can't have all this asynchronicity. You have to have it all at the same time. But basically what my kids have with me is a one-on-one tutor guide, right? Following them. And that's another reason why I love it. So, yeah.
So would you say someone who's never homeschooled before, could they start doing Montessori with a 3rd grader, or would that only really work for someone starting off at the very beginning?
It can be done, but there is a normalization that has to take place first with the adult, not the child. Guidepost has part of their virtual homeschooling program. They've got a parent support that happens weekly. You can come on and you can talk to a trained guide. So is it doable? Yes. But I have found that if a child doesn't already know and hasn't been exposed, it can be a little bit tricky, especially if again, it comes back down to the adult. If the adult doesn't really understand Montessori, like live it, breathe it, and have it be a part of the fabric of their being, it can be challenging. It can be challenging.
And can someone do Montessori homeschooling on a tight budget, or is it something where they need to have a good substantial amount of disposable income to pay for all of these things?
It's a good question. There are some Montessori guru types that have their own companies, and they'll say you can do it very scrappy, very DIY, very budget. And I believe that Montessori can be for everybody. People think that it is a certain specific type of materials. If you understand the purpose behind the materials, then others can be used as a substitute. With that being said, there are certain things that are needed and necessary, and some of the materials, if you want to get the authentic ones, can be expensive. But a lot of the materials are designed for a classroom setting that are designed to withstand and hold up against the use of 30 kids year after year. So in a home setting, those types of materials are not needed. Thankfully, there are vendors. For example, Allison's Montessori is a company based out of New Jersey, and it was created by Montessori guides who homeschooled their own children. So they have a value line and a premium line. So schools who want to invest can get the real good stuff. Not that their value line is subpar, it's actually excellent. And I have purchased some of those materials and they're great. But in other words, you don't need to laminate all the things at home. You don't need to have it, especially if it's just your own children and you've taught them how to use the material thoughtfully and they're careful, then you don't have to have it like you would, for example, in a classroom. So, and with that being said too, we homeschool through a public charter in California. We receive funds, education funds. And so I've been really blessed because other people don't have that and they homeschool independently, like other states don't have those programs, but I do. And so I have that where I don't have to necessarily take it out of our family budget. But in some cases, I have opted to purchase out of pocket because authentic Montessori materials do hold their value and they resell for almost what you purchase them if you take good care of them. So it's almost like you're leasing them. I mean, almost. Not really. There's no like lease company. I don't want to give people the wrong notion that kind of thing exists. But my point is they really hold their value once your children have grown out of it. And if you don't need them anymore, you can resell them and get your money back. So that's a cool thing.
You can buy it used too, but you're paying probably 75% versus like some homeschool curriculum you can buy for 10 cents on the dollar.
Sure.
So my final question I wanted to ask was about socialization, because as you know, everyone always asks about socialization. So what is your response to that? How do your kids socialize?
You know what? I can't keep them from socializing. I mean, here's the thing, because Montessori is, it's all about independence, right? So when we're at restaurants, they order their own food. When they're at the library, they go talk to the librarian about the books that they need. I also started a co-op, which is not Montessori based, but I co-organize and lead one. And so every single week, my kids are able to do projects together with friends. They are in martial arts that they attend 4, sometimes 5 days a week. And my daughter's going to be going for her black belt in the summertime, which means she's going to be a training instructor. She's already been put in the front of the class. Public speaking is not a problem. with homeschooling too, we have homeschooled and taken our stuff to do our work cycle at my parents' home. So they're able to interact with their grandparents. They're able to interact with cousins. They interact with the neighbors. We've been having this whole situation with leaks and all kinds of problems in our home. Well, my kids have been interacting with the contractors alongside us, like observing and learning. And how better to learn about real life challenges and all that sort of thing than seeing it and living it alongside their parents. So my kids are always around people, and I've had to actually guard against being out so much. My first year of homeschooling, I nearly burned us all out because I was so enthusiastic about doing all the things that we were never home. And it was really hard to keep up the home, like as far as just chores and having downtime that the kids need. So, yeah, if you live under a rock, of course, then you're going to be, even as an adult, you're going to be a hermit and not out there. But between doing extracurriculars, going to, and it isn't, by the way, our co-op is free, so it doesn't have to cost money. We meet at the park, and we've been able to do a lot of things very low budget, and all the parents just pay for their things. Like we did a book club, all sorts of really cool things. And it's possible. They've had so much interaction with friends that, and not just friends, people of all ages, adults, all the way to little kids, as in the siblings, like toddlers we're talking about. So their experience has really run the gamut age-wise. So if you get yourself out there, you go to things, the library holds free things all the time, especially in the summer, Tinker Lab type stuff, art hours, and this is where they go and they interact. We just go out into the community. I've sent my kids to, while I'm in the store, to go buy stuff at the grocery store and pay for it themselves with me there, but they're checking out, to put them in those, they want it, to put them in those experiences. So socialization has not been a problem. It's a long-winded answer to say that it's been not a problem. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule to do this interview. As you said, there's not a ton of people doing Montessori, so we're so fortunate to have been able to learn from you about Montessori.
Thank you.
I appreciate your input and your candidness and your time. Thank you.